Hi guys, in this video I'm going to explain to you what pointers are. So you should already be familiar with basic data types, such as a boolean, integer, float, character, double, and so on. So each of these store a value. This one stores a boolean value, integers store a whole number, and floating point stores a floating point value. Now with integers, with pointers, we do the asterisk. For example, int star, this one stores an address. Now to better explain this concept to you, I have an address in the real world, and this address points to some kind of building. So we know if we follow this address, there will be a building. And I apologize for the bad drawing, but this represents a building. Now if we just have an address, it doesn't help us much. We want to know what is located at that address. For example, if I say at that address we find a pizza restaurant, you can use that information and it's much more helpful. So similar in C++, we know a variable holds an address, and the preceding type, in this case an integer, that is the type that is located at that address. So we know if we go to this address that the pointer is pointing to, and we go there, we know we find an integer. So with that in mind, let's see how we declare pointers. For example, int star is a pointer to an integer. Or float star, pointer to a float. So this one points to a float. And when I say points to, it really means that this variable can store an address, and only an address of a location where a floating point value is stored. We can do this with any type. So if I want to have an address of a character, I do character star, pointer to char. So this one points to a character. Or if I want to have a string pointer to a string, and I know that at that address that I store in this variable, there will be a string. So take away here with pointers, we always have an address, and we always have the type of data that is located at that address. So address to an int, address to a float, address to a char, address to a string, and so on. Now we could take this a bit further, but I don't really want to confuse it too much. But to give you a quick example, you may see something like this. So what this is, if we read this the same way, a pointer to a pointer to an integer. So to spell this out, it points to a pointer to an integer. So if we translate this up here, we know we have an address, and if we go to that address, we know we find another address to a pizza restaurant. So in this case here, we have an address. If we go to that address, we know we'll find an address to an integer. So sometimes you see things like this, but this just gives you a quick introduction. If you see multiple stars, it's really just an address to another address that points to a data type. And you could even have more pointers added up here. But what we want to focus on is simple pointers like this. Pointer to an int, pointer to a float, pointer to a char, and so on. So let's see how we can initialize pointers. So if I have an integer called number, and this is 5, and I want to store the address of this integer, I would need to declare a variable that can store an address, and the address will point to an integer. So it'll be int, and then pointer type, I call this pointer 1, and then I use a new operator, this is the ampersand here, this is called the address. So ampersand means address of operator. So the way I can read this is I have a variable number, and then I use the address of operator. So give me the address of number and assign it to the variable that can store an address, which is pointer1. And this variable points to an integer. So we can see that these two types match. I know that when I go to this address, there will be an integer. Now I can do this with other types. For example, if I have a float 3.4, and now I want to store this redefined, so let's call it f1. Now, if I want to store the address of f1 in a variable, I can do float pointer, and I call this pointer2. Give me the address of f1 and store it in pointer2. So you can really do this with any type. The important thing is that the two types have to match. So I cannot do pointer to an integer, this pointer3, and then do address of f1. I get a compile time error. The reason for this is that I'm taking the address of a floating point variable and trying to store it into a variable that stores an address to an integer. So this will not match. If I would follow this address, there will obviously be a float stored, not an integer. So the compiler will check for this. So this won't work. So types must match. Now let's see what we can do with pointers a little bit. So there are two things that we can do. We can work on the address and we can work on the value. So to get started, let's just output pointers. And there, like I said, one way to output a pointer is just to, let's say, output pointer1. This will output the address. So let's see if I can run this. And when I run this, this should output the address. There it was. Moment. Okay, so here we see the address. If I go back up here, this is the address of where number is stored. Now we can also, like I mentioned, not just output the address, but we can go to that address and then output the value that is stored. So here, if I do cout star ptr and line, this will output the value at the address. So you probably noticed that I have the asterisk two times. One times I use it to declare a pointer, and here I use it to follow a pointer to go to that address. So kind of like in my arrow up here. If I use that star, it will follow the pointer. It will go to that address. So if I read the entire line, I want to output a value, I go to the address of my pointer, and then I output the value there. So running this, first line outputs the address, second line outputs the value at that address. And if I look up here, I stored the address of number, so I know there's an integer located, and the integer is 5. Now I can, of course, read pointers too. Let's say read pointers. So if I have another variable, number2, I could go to the pointer of pointer1 and assign that value. This is kind of like doing number2 equals number1, because I know pointer1 points to number. This one should be just number, not number1. And then number2 will store that value. Now if you try to do something like this, this will not work, because it will read the address and try to assign the address in an integer. So we have to say we want to go to that address and then take the value at that address and store it in number2. Now what we can also do is update the value. For example, if I have pointer1 again, and I do pointer1 plus 1. This will increment the address. So if I did this, my pointer will no longer point to the integer. I actually added 1 to the address. Now if I do star pointer 1 equals star pointer 1 plus 1, this will increment the value at the address. Okay, so what this will do is go to the address, at that address is 5, add 1 to it, so now it's 6, and then take the 6 and store it at the address where the pointer points to, because we go to the address and we assign it. So let me actually take the example up here to explain this down here. So this one, go to the address, currently I have 5, I add 1 to it, so 5 plus 1, I do 5 plus 1, this will be 6, and then I take the 6, again go to the address, and when I go there, then I assign the 6 to it, so now I store 6 at that location. So this actually has an effect, because if I output number and I comment this one, so we keep the address, I don't want to change it, I still want to point to that integer. But if I output number now, what will number be? Number will be 6. See? Even though I never touched number, I used the pointer to update it. So this kind of things you can do with pointers. We can do the same thing with floating point values. So one last example, let's say we have a float, call this my float 5.2, and we have a floating point pointer, pointer to float. I think we had this already, so let's just call it pointer 10, address of my float, and now I follow my pointer, so pointer 10, I call it, and I do, what do? I assign 10.738. Now if I output my float, it will be the newly assigned value, so 20.738. And here again I use the pointer to change it. So really with pointers you can do any assignment that you do with regular variables. Just always keep in mind the star, you go to that location, you'll always work on the value. Without the star you actually work on the variable, and the variable stores an address. So if we don't have the star, we just work on the address and update the address. And I hope this gives you some ideas about pointers. Thank you for watching.